From the halls of NATO to the coast of Venezuela to military drills across the globe, this week revealed a single unsettling pattern. The old rules of power are breaking down. Welcome to the world this week. These aren't isolated events. They are connected shifts in a world order that is fracturing in real time. I'm Mandisa, and this is our weekly recap. NATO is showing alarming signs of fracture, and it is our lead story this week. The world's most powerful military alliance is facing its most serious threat not from an external enemy, but from within. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded in 1949 on a single sacred principle: collective security against a common foe. For generations, the principle was unwavering. But today, that foundation is cracking. For years, the primary tension was financial. President Trump's America First doctrine demanded allies pay their fair share, arguing the US bore too much of the burden. And the pressure worked. Under mounting demands, the majority of NATO members are now on track to meet the 2% of GDP spending target. But just as the financial dispute seemed to be resolved, a far more dangerous crisis emerged. Last week, following a serious security incident, Poland took the grave step of invoking Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which is a call for urgent consultation among allies. And the American response was reportedly delayed. This is not a small thing. Article 4 is the final step before invoking Article 5, which is the heart of the alliance, the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all. To hesitate is to signal that this guarantee is now negotiable. Actions, in this case, speak far louder than the reaffirmation spoken at the UN this week. But the story does not end there. The demands, coming from Trump, have now escalated beyond defense spending into a full-scale economic war. The new platform demands NATO members immediately halt all purchases of Russian energy and impose automatic, massive tariffs on China. Let's be clear on the implications. It's not a request to make NATO stronger. It is an ultimatum that forces Europe to choose between its alliance with the US and its own economic stability. Forcing a sudden end to Russian energy would trigger major issues for nations like Germany and Hungary. Forcing a trade war with China would invite devastating retaliation against European economies. This is the great paradox. The policies being touted to strengthen the West could actually cripple it from within. It subordinates the economic sovereignty of America's allies to a single confrontational agenda. It treats NATO not as a partnership, but as a weaponized bloc. The alliance is now the chip on the table in a high-stakes gamble. And the consequences of that bet for global security and for the West itself could be devastating. Now, from high-level political fractures to the on-the-ground reality, the world is preparing for conflict. This week, military drills across the world weren't just exercises. They were strategic signals in key geopolitical theaters. First, to Europe. Russia and Belarus launched massive Zapad 2025 drills right on the border with NATO members Poland and Lithuania. These weren't routine maneuvers. They included simulated nuclear launches, hypersonic missile tests, and bomber patrols, all just miles from NATO's eastern flank. This is more than training. It's a deliberate signal of force, aimed squarely at the alliance. And the timing, so close to NATO's internal rifts, is seemingly not coincidental. It's a cycle of action and reaction, each step raising the temperature, in a region that is already on high alert. Meanwhile, in Central Asia, China, Russia, and most notably Mongolia staged a new border defense exercise. On the surface, it looked like coordination against external threats, but symbolically, it was something bigger. Mongolia, long a neutral buffer between great powers, has now become part of joint operations with Beijing and Moscow. This is about more than border security. It is about erasing the lines of separation and binding Mongolia into an emerging Eurasian security sphere. For China and Russia, it's a way to project that their partnership is no longer bilateral. It is expanding outward, drawing once neutral states into their orbit. In Northeast Asia, the United States, South Korea, and Japan carried out their most advanced trilateral drills to date, called Freedom Edge, with naval maneuvers, missile defense simulations, and joint air patrols. On the surface, it was a rehearsal for countering North Korea's missile program, but the deeper message was unmistakable. Washington is weaving its bilateral alliances into a single integrated defense network. For Beijing, this signals that any future conflict over Taiwan or the wider Pacific will not be one-on-one contest, but a coordinated front of American power and its closest allies. For Pyongyang, it is a warning that its provocations now trigger not 3 separate responses, but one unified shield. But North Korea sent back a strong message telling them that they will not be deterred, warning the countries that no good will come from these activities. It might be surprising to tell you that there are even more Navy drills to consider. Even the Himalayas are not immune. China has staged high-altitude maneuvers near the Indian border, rehearsing logistics and artillery operations in some of the world's harshest terrain. And in the Arctic, NATO allies are running cold weather drills, preparing for a new era of strategic competition in a region once defined by ice, but increasingly defined by access and power. Individually, these drills might be dismissed as routine, but together they form a far more worrying pattern. Whether in Europe, Asia, the Himalayas, or the Arctic, militaries are practicing for scenarios that are not theoretical. Nuclear command, maritime interdiction, high-altitude warfare, ballistic missile defense, these are the building blocks of real conflict. This is what great power competition looks like in practice. It normalizes military presence in flashpoints, increases the risk of accidental escalation, and shows that nations are preparing for a future where diplomacy fails and conflict is decided by force. These aren't just drills. They are a barometer of global tensions, and right now, the needle is pointing firmly toward the storm. Finally, a story that should be dominating headlines, but has been largely overlooked. A dangerous and direct military confrontation is unfolding between the US and Venezuela that radically escalates the war on drugs into potential hot conflict. The United States carried out an operation against Venezuelan naval vessels, framing it as a part of its long-running war on drugs. Officially, Washington says that these actions are about stopping narcotics shipments before they reach American shores. But Caracas tells a very different story. For Venezuela, this was not a counter-narcotics operation. It was a hostile act. Officials there describe it as a violent attack on their sovereignty designed not to stop drugs, but to weaken the state, intimidate its navy, and ultimately justify regime change. And beneath the rhetoric, another reality lurks. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Any confrontations with Washington cannot be separated from the geopolitics of energy. This isn't just another sanctions announcement. This is a sequence of events with battleship diplomacy and live ammunition. It began with a US kinetic strike on a Venezuelan boat, ending the lives of 11 people. The Trump administration claimed without public evidence that they were narco-terrorists. Venezuela called it a heinous crime against civilians. But the real escalation happened days later, and it's a story of remarkable naval aggression. The US destroyer, the USS Jason Dunham, intercepted a Venezuelan fishing vessel inside Venezuela's exclusive economic zone. Let's be clear about what happened next. US sailors, 18 armed personnel to be exact, boarded and occupied that vessel for 8 hours. From Venezuela's perspective, this is not just a provocation. It's a hostile act of military force against a sovereign nation's economic activity in its own waters. The US frames this as vital counter-narcotics work, but the response from Caracas has been anything but quiet. President Maduro deployed troops to 284 locations, activated civilian militias, and declared Venezuela ready for an armed fight. The US has responded by sending more warships and F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico. So why is this our under-the-radar story? Because this is a classic case of a long-simmering conflict hitting a boiling point away from the world's main spotlight. What makes this incident significant isn't just the clash at sea, but the framing. To American ears, this is about criminal cartels. To Venezuelan ears, it is about imperialism and resource plunder. These two narratives are irreconcilable, and that gap is where miscalculation can grow into escalation. The war on drugs provides the public justification, but the underlying drivers are pure geopolitics: oil, power, and the US effort to counter Russian and Chinese influence in its backyard by aggressively pressuring the Maduro regime. And while the world's attention is fixed on Europe and Asia, Washington's actions in Latin America remind us that great power competition is truly global. The Caribbean, too, is becoming a theater in which security, energy, and sovereignty collide. The risk of miscalculation here is extremely high. A clash between a Venezuelan patrol boat and a US destroyer could instantly trigger a larger regional crisis, spike global oil prices, and create a new flashpoint that draws in outside powers. It's a reminder that the era of great power competition isn't confined to Europe or Asia. It's playing out actively and dangerously much closer to home for the US. And this is why we watch stories under the radar. They might not grab the biggest headlines, but they reveal the deeper fault lines shaping tomorrow's crises. So, what connects the fractures in NATO, the surge in global military drills stretching from the Arctic to the Pacific, and a naval confrontation in the Caribbean? On the surface, they seem like isolated events. But look closer, and a single, unsettling pattern emerges. The rapid unraveling of the post-Cold War system of rules and alliances and its replacement with a new era of transactional might makes right power politics. Together, they tell us something fundamental about the state of the world. So let's connect the threads. Our first thread is the crisis of trust inside alliances. The NATO alliance, which has been the bedrock of Western security for 75 years, is now questioning its core principle, Article 5. The US's hesitation after Poland invoked Article 4 raises the question, can America's allies still rely on its guarantees? When the security guarantee becomes conditional on cash payments or adherence to one member's trade policy, the entire architecture of collective security weakens. That uncertainty doesn't stay confined to Brussels. It echoes outward. Russia sees it. China sees it. This doesn't just create a crisis within NATO, it creates a power vacuum outside of it. Every hesitation is an opportunity for adversaries to test the edges of Western resolve. The second thread is militarization as the new normal. As the foundation cracks, every major power is preparing for a more volatile world. From Zappa 2025 to Freedom Edge, From the Himalayan border maneuvers to Arctic drills, the tempo of exercises is accelerating. This isn't just posturing. It's the sound of a world rehearsing for a future where old alliances are weaker and military might matters more. They are stress testing the system and each other, looking for the weaknesses in a less predictable landscape. When every great power is practicing for war, the threshold between training and fighting becomes dangerously thin. And the third thread is the expansion of confrontation beyond the obvious front lines. The clash between Washington and Caracas shows that the geopolitics of power isn't limited to Europe and Asia. Latin America, long treated as America's backyard, is once again becoming a contested arena where narratives of sovereignty, energy, and imperialism collide. The war on drugs provides a moral and legal pretext for a military action that serves a larger goal, asserting dominance in its own hemisphere and pushing back against Russian and Chinese influence on its doorsteps. The through line is the decline of a rule-based order. These stories show a world drifting towards a more dangerous equilibrium, one where alliances are fragile and militaries are perpetually rehearsing for conflict, and confrontations can erupt even in regions assumed to be secondary. The danger is not just open war, but the slow erosion of stability everywhere at once. The great paradox is that the actions meant to project strength, making demands of NATO, flexing military muscle, enforcing blockades, may ultimately make the world more dangerous and unstable for everyone, including the nations initiating them. Are we watching a new world order being born? Or are we watching the old one fracture in real time? Let me know what you think in the comment section. And that was your briefing on a week where the foundations of the global order seem to shift in real time. I'll be tracking every development in these stories in my daily shorts on this channel, so make sure you're following for the latest. Now I want to hear from you. This is a community for analysis. So let's discuss. In the comments, tell me which of these fault lines you find the most concerning. First, the internal fracture of NATO and the conditional US security guarantee, or the direct US-Venezuela naval confrontation and the escalation in America's backyard, or the broader pattern of military drills and great power posturing worldwide. Do you see these as isolated crises, or are they connected symptoms of a larger breakdown? If this deep dive into the mechanics of power provides you with value, the best way to support this channel is to hit the like button and subscribe. You'll be joining a growing community of people who look beyond the headlines. I'm Mandisa. Thank you for watching. Until next time.